Hey all, welcome back to possibly YouTube's slowest restoration series. This one's been a long time coming, I know. It's been a pretty big project in itself and I kind of got stuck halfway through, but more on that later. But for now, it's time to build a new loom. This one's pretty trashed. I'd already done a lot of work measuring and working out what wires I needed, but now I wanted to go through and work out all the terminals and bits I'd need. The Lucas pin terminals are expensive enough that I didn't want to just order a whole bunch, and I wanted to make sure I had enough of everything before I started. I did get a bit bored halfway through though, and I started guesstimating some of it. Back in the office, I spent a couple of hours putting my order together. I went with thin wall wiring to make the loom a bit thinner, and also I was having a hard time finding the original spec wires in all the colours I needed. Also, it was a little bit cheaper, which was nice. It did even give me a chance to upgrade some of the wiring without it ending up too thick. While I was waiting for the order to arrive, I spent a bit of time going over the wiring diagram. Or I tried to anyway. A few days later, I had the order. That looked like a lot of wire, and yet somehow not enough. Oh well, hopefully I've got everything. As well as the wiring, I had all the terminals I needed. Cable ties, of course. A shiny new wire stripper. Multimeter. Some heat shrink. My trusty old test light. A whole bunch of super seal connectors. A crimp tool, a bunch of test leads, and of course my wiring diagram. That's probably not everything I need, but it's good enough. Let's get started. Okay, so I got the main loom separated out. This is what I'm going to be working on to start with. There's other looms down here for the rear of the car and the engine bay. I'll deal with those later. But for now, we'll start with this. It looks complicated, but it's not actually too bad. So everything starts here. That comes from the battery. Rolls into the fuse box here. Then everything goes out to the switches here. Into the dashboard. That's for the instrument panel, and then back down here out to the lights in the front of the car. That's the rear of the car. And you've got instrument panel lighting there, and so on. It's just a case of following it through like one wire at a time. When I took the car apart, I labelled everything up, which was useful, so I can pretty much see where everything's supposed to go. Some of it more useful than others, but I can figure it out from here. The dash and steering wheel needed to come out for now. Now we'll start with this fuse box. The terminals looked a bit crusty, so I gave them all a good clean up. But sure enough, one fuse wasn't connecting properly. So I cleaned up the other side with some brass cleaner. And we're good to go. The first thing I needed was an earth connection to the battery. I'll get a proper earth strap sorted out later on, but for now, this will do the job. I'm starting with the fuse box and basically working my way out. First bit, let's get some power to the fuses. Two of the fuses are fed from the ignition switch, the other two are connected directly to the battery, so we'll start with the battery connection first. Again, I'll sort something out properly later on, but for now these rings terminals will do while I get everything set up. My original plan here was to pull each wire out of the old loom once I've replicated it with new wire. I abandoned that in the end in favour of keeping the old loom intact and just putting tape on the wires I'd already done so I could keep track. And the fuse box is now live. Well, half of it anyway. So that's one wire marked off, several dozen more to go. Now let's connect the fuse box to some actual components. I'll start with this purple one here. It goes from the fuse box, up to the fog lamp switch, and then onto the indicator stalk. Okay, that's all well and good, but I've got 3 purple wires here. Ah, so this one's also hooked up to the cigarette lighter of all things. Okay. So I chased this one through to the indicator stalk plug, and apparently that's not the end of the line for this wire. It loops around to another terminal and then off out again. And if I follow that round, it goes to the instrument panel to power the clock. So this is suddenly turning into a fairly long and complicated bit of wire. I hope they're not all going to be like this. Well, let's just get this one out of the loom anyway. If it is possible to get replacement terminals for the instrument panel plugs, I haven't been able to find them, so I'll just cut these ones off and splice them into the new loom. Now I can make up the new wire. Okay, so first cable done. That one for the cigarette lighter. This one I screwed up. I managed to cut this right in the middle of the cable, so I'll splice that together. It's not pretty, I'll probably replace that, but it'll do for now. And then that goes to the fog lamp switch. And then to the indicator stalk. And then onto the instrument panel. So, let's get it fitted. Fitting was easy enough at this stage, just a case of plugging it into the fuse box and then draping it over the dash. It would get a lot more complicated as I added more wires though. Okay, so we've now done that. No, we haven't. Damn it. I messed that up, didn't I? Okay. So done that. And that. And that. And that. I got a bunch of these on eBay. They're cheap enough. They just do all the de-pinning. Easy. While I'm on the purples, so I'll do this guy, and that's done with those 2 fuses. this guy here. Which bizarrely enough goes down to this loom and then back off again. My cheapy eBay de-pinning kit didn't have the right size to undo these female pins, but I just found a bit of brass tube of the right size for the job. I decided it would be easier to make up the wires here in the workshop rather than doing it all in the garage on the roof of the car. I don't have the right tool for these right angle terminals, but they're easy enough to crimp nicely with just a pair of pliers. This ratcheting tool makes easy work on everything else though. Well worth buying these if you do much of this work. Now before I get too much further, I need to start dealing with earths. So these look these look nice and simple. Just go straight to earth. However, the reality is not so simple. It starts here and it goes all the way under here into this big old blob here and then out all the way up here down to here, to that mess there, down to here and here and here and here, all the way into here. It's one continuous run. All the earth points on this loom are basically all wired in together. So before I get too much further, I should probably get started on that. Now I don't have whatever technology you need to do this, but I've just got these instead, so I'll just replace them with those. And here it all is in isolation. It wasn't as bad as I thought. One thing that did surprise me though is this here. That is the only actual earth connection in this whole bit of wiring. So if that breaks, or if any of that breaks, then nothing in this loom will actually work. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a couple of earth points here and there. I'll add one there and probably down where the radio is as well, just to give it a bit of redundancy. But for now, let's just see if this works. So far so good. This is the connector for the radio. This is one of the furthest points out. And this is the other far point. This goes to the brake warning switch. So, happy with that. Let's get it in place. So now I've got all the earth done, I can carry on with the horns again. So we'll do this one next. That's the horn switch. So that will be the connector, and then that goes down to the relay. So there it is there. And that goes all the way down to the horn relay. Once I got the wiring down to the relay, I figured I might as well carry on down to the horns themselves. Or one of them at least. Now I can't actually wire the horns up yet, but here's the horn lead. And here's some pretty shady test setup. And here's a cat. Come on. So now the horn button should light up the test light. Success! As I mentioned before, I do need to splice the instrument panel plugs in, but for now I'll just hook everything up with a connector block. It works. So we have a clock now. And a big old metal wires. In theory, cigarette lighter should work as well. I'll call that a win. So, I think that's about it for now. I'll just keep on plodding on and doing wire after wire. I won't record all of it because it's just going to be more of the same, so you'll get a montage coming up now. Okay, so I'm dealing with the starter relay now, and I've been kind of scratching my head over this bit. There's a yellow-white wire that goes to the ballast resistor, and I couldn't work out how this wires up. So here's the ballast resistor here, that goes to the coil, and that goes, obviously that broke off at some point, so I don't know where exactly it went. But when I tried chasing this through, here's that yellow and white wire, goes through here, then it goes up here into the loom, wraps all the way up here, and it ends up here. And then it goes this pink and white wire all the way back down, all the way up here, and it terminates here. Now that actually tracks. So there's yellow and white, goes up to there, then it goes apparently to the ballast resistor wire, and then it joins in with a bunch of other white wires, which that does. So I did a bit of research, and apparently this is actually the ballast resistor wire. So if I follow from the yellow wire there to the white wires up here gives 1.8 ohms. And the ballast resistor wire also gives 1.8. So this should never have been in there in the first place. So that's the wire's pretty much done now, but it's a right mess. I need to try and turn this into something that looks like an actual wiring loom. I bundled everything together using masking tape. I actually found that better than cable ties as it kept everything in the right place, and it was easy enough to undo if I needed to adjust anything. As well as the instrument panel, there's a few other connectors on this loom that can't be easily replaced, so I just cut them off the old loom and spliced them into the new one. I found these little butt connectors which do a great job and take up way less space than the usual insulated ones you can get. With a bit of heat shrink over them, they're nice and tidy and not much bigger than the wires themselves. So that's everything in place now, so it's time to swap the actual plugs over. I didn't want to do this before in case I lost track of which pin was meant to go where. It was easier to do this all in one go. I made a quick note of all the pin layout before undoing everything, and then recreated it on the new loom. This wiper switch is actually from a Mini. It's the same switch as the TR7 one, but it has a different connector for some reason. That was easily remedied. The ignition switch works fine, but the wiring's a mess. Rather than replacing it, I'll just cut off the old wires and splice some new ones in. Just in case any of you are worried about how small the new wires look compared to the old ones, here's the actual cores side by side. As you can see, the cores are the same size, it's just the insulation that's thinner. In a lot of cases, the new wires are actually a higher capacity than the old ones. And that's the last of it. Essentially the main loom's more or less complete now, save for a couple of connections at the front. And that's where things got stuck. After getting like 99% of the loom done, I got bogged down trying to work out the wiring for the light pods. They weren't making any sense, I couldn't tell the wiring colours apart, and I was just getting really frustrated. On top of trying to deal with the engine issues as well, I just kind of got burned out with the whole project. So I decided to step away for a week or two, go do something else for a bit, and then come back nice and refreshed. Well, that week or two turned into a month, which turned into 6 months. I just kind of got out of the habit of even coming in here, and it occurred to me a little while ago that I was actively avoiding it. But I'm never going to see this back on the road if I don't put in the work, so here we are. It's freezing out here, it's the middle of the night, but I got my mojo back, and so I'm back on the case. Oh, and in the end it took me about 10 minutes to get the wiring sorted out, so that's all done, and I've got a solution sorted out for the engine as well, so let's get cracking. So now it's all hooked up and done, let's see what works and what doesn't. This is literally the first time I've hooked up the battery since right at the start of all this. Am I confident it'll work? The fire extinguisher should tell you all you need to know there. Wow. So good news, the passenger headlamp pod works. Bad news, it's not supposed to. The headlight switch should be off, and also the indicators are glowing. So one light works when it's not supposed to and doesn't work when it is. The other light isn't working at all and the indicators are permanently on. Let's see if anything else works. Wipers? No. Indicators? Nope. The horn works though, so that's something. And nothing's actually on fire, so I'm going to call that a partial win. Okay, so that was an easy fix. I'd hooked up these earth connections earlier, but actually forgot to tighten them down. So I've got them all tightened up now. Let's see if that fixes it. With the earth points actually hooked up properly, let's give it another try. Hazard lights doing what they should. That's more like it. And both lights lift up too. This is looking much better. No side light though. Dash lights work. They're pretty dim, but that's normal. The main beam flash works as well. The wiring on the side light's actually fine. I guess I just need a new bulb. I don't have a spare, so I'll just hook up the other side for now. The wipers still don't work though. Neither do the indicators, oddly enough. So with everything I've tested so far, the heaters, the wash wipe and the indicators don't work. Everything else seems fine. Which seems pretty bad, but if you look at everything here, wiper motor, the heater, flasher unit down here, that is all connected to these fuses here, which are ignition switched. If you go up here, follow this round to the ignition switch, there should be power coming out of that white wire. That's this one here, and yep, there's power there. And yet there's no power at these fuses. There is on these two, but 3 and 4, nothing. Okay, so I've been following this around and apparently I'm an idiot. So that's my feed to the fuses, which is correct, but without the ignition on, that is still live, which doesn't make any sense at all. But I did a bit of other prodding around, and this brown wire here, that should be coming directly from the battery. And there's nothing. So where's that getting its power from? So follow this down, and I wired this backwards. That should be there, the brown should be there. So I'm energising that wire there rather than this wire. So got to rewire that. But even after that, the indicators in the heater still don't work. The wipers started working though, so I'm getting somewhere at least. Come on, Cookie, what's the problem here? There's got to be something I'm missing. After doing a bit of playing around, I found out the indicators did work, but the switch doesn't. Bridging the connectors on the switch makes them work just fine. I might end up having to replace this switch after all the time I've spent trying to repair it. Okay, so now it's time to figure out what's going on with the heater. Well, that's not going to help. No, still nothing. No power coming from the fuse box, that's odd. Or is it? Looks like a bad connection here. I'll just chop it off and redo it. Well, it was bound to happen sooner or later. I was trying to get the heater working, and as soon as I turned it on, I got a little spark and popped a fuse. That was the only one I had as well, so I had to wait a few days, but now I got a few more. So, figure out what's going on with this, get the new fuse in, and we'll carry on. Well, that's not a good start. I've got those wired completely backwards. So that'll explain the blown fuse then. With it rewired properly this time, let's give it another go. What is this, third time lucky? Fourth? I lose count. Now that sounds more like it. Looks like the contacts are the wrong way round. That's fair enough, I just guessed it. That's easy enough to fix. Result. Okay, that's the tricky bit out the way. Now let's do the rear loom. This first part is laid flat where it runs along the sill. I haven't figured out how to redo that yet, but I'll sort that out on another day. But otherwise the loom's quite straightforward, just a lot of long wires. So that's all the wiring done. Now I've just got to turn it into a loom. Again, this is pretty straightforward. The main struggle was just untangling the mess of wires. Again, I used masking tape to keep it all under control. And it's done. Now let's hook up the plugs. Some of these pins really didn't want to come out. They took a lot of force even with the depinning tool. I couldn't find replacements for these connectors, so I'll just cut them off here and wire them into the new loom. I was running short of the butt connectors here, so I just used spade terminals. It'll be fine. And lastly, the engine loom. The easiest of the lot, but first of all I've got to clean all this old oil off. This is a connector for the gearbox loom. I'll just deep in this now and take it inside to clean up. It's pretty grotty. Some of you might be wondering why I'm even bothering with these old connectors instead of just replacing them with modern ones. Well, firstly, I'm cheap. But more importantly, I want this to stay original as much as possible, so if someone in the future wants to swap looms over or whatever, then it'll be an easy swap. Thirdly, I don't have a super seal crimp tool, and crimping them by hand makes me grumpy, so the old Lucas connectors it is. I've got an odd one here. This is the wiring diagram for the alternator. Clearly shows two browns and a brown with a yellow. But on the loom itself, I've only got the one brown. It doesn't look like there ever was one. So I did a bit of digging around, and there are actually 4 wires. There's my other brown one. At some point between there and there, it vanishes. And there it is. Okay, so I don't know why that was tucked in like that, but well, I'll just wire it up as it should be. This de-pinning tool's pretty much had it now. The end's all bent out of shape. Fortunately, hopefully I don't really need it anymore after this. Old. And new. So then I hooked up the 2 new looms. Which involved moving the car for the first time in about a year, I think. Still rolls nice and easy though. I left a fair bit of slack on these wires. I'll cut them down to proper length and redo the terminals once I've got everything finished and wrapped. It's easier to do that than to try and stretch out a wire that I cut too short. So, let's see how the new additions work. Okay, I've been trying to figure out the rear lights. I've got as far as the reverse lights and they're not working for some reason. But also, when I plugged in this loom, the low fuel light randomly came on. And I think it's because of this. That is a reverse light lead. Green and brown, and on this side it's green and orange. So you have the reverse lamp here, green and brown, fuel warning delay unit, green orange. So I think I've just got a bit of colour blindness there. Luckily that's an easy enough fix, just swapping a couple of pins over. I don't actually have a reverse light switch to test this properly, so I'll just bodge it for now. We have reverse lights. Well, one anyway. That'll be white. Two. The lighting now works. Still got to hook up number plate lights. That should work. Indicators don't. Handbrake light works. Interior light works. Rear window heater works. Seatbelt bit works. Choke light works. Temperature gauge works. And the oil light works. And so does the ignition light. Radio works. So does the cigarette lighter. Starter motor relay works. So does the horn. And the starter wiring works too. Fuel gauge works. And after a delay, the fuel light works. So I've got a weird issue here. So this is the coil wire. Because it's got the ballast resistor inside the wiring loom, which is this pink guy here, I'm supposed to be getting about 6 volts through here, but I'm getting 12. Now the actual battery voltage is 12.2, so there's a little bit of resistance, but not what it should be. We are getting the right resistance. Okay, so apparently I don't know what I'm talking about. I did some research and it turns out that to get that voltage you actually need a load on the system. I was just running it through my multimeter and obviously there was no load on that. So I hooked up this old coil. Wiring's a bit iffy, I know, but whatever. And now I'm getting 4 volts out of it. Now this is a resistor coil in itself, which may be why I'm getting 4 volts and not 6. Also the battery's getting a bit low, it's reading just below 12 volts, so I think we're okay with that. And if I turn the key to start, I get 11 volts. So I think we're all good on that. Now weirdly, this coil is what came off the car originally, and it is a resistor coil, which means it's supposed to run on 12 volts. It also had an external ballast resistor wired in, and it also had the ballast resistor wire in here. So who knows what voltage the coil was actually getting. I'm just surprised it actually ran at all. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up here. I think this is going to be a long enough video already. Overall I'm fairly happy with everything. There's been a few little teething problems of course, but I think I made, what, 4 mistakes out of, what, probably a couple of 100 connections, so I can live with that, that's not too bad. So I've still got a fair bit to do on the wiring. I've still got to finish off down the front, and then there's going to be a few extra bits and pieces that I'm going to wire in. If I'm going to be running extra wires, then it makes sense to do it now while I can wrap them all up neatly with the rest of the loom. And then of course I need to fix a couple of little issues and then get the whole thing wrapped. The bulb holders at the back are being a bit finicky. The indicator stalk doesn't work. The wiper flick function doesn't work. And the interior lights are really dim. But that'll be coming in future videos, so stay tuned for that. I promise it won't take so long this time. I've actually got a whole bunch of other videos in the pipeline as well, not just on this, but on the other cars in the fleet as well, so stick around for that. For now though, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one. See ya!